Welcome. This is history in the making, really history. The beginning of that incredible, amazing spiritual concept called history. You know it as being bored in school and having to memorize dates, but that's not what it is. Join us. It's history, truly history in the making here. Hi, I'm Michael Shevack. Welcome to GODSEARCH, and we're going to continue our incredibly blessed and amazing, I hope it is to you, and I'm not just speaking to myself, this amazing experience of covenant. This is the human idea that there is an alliance between the laws of God and creation and humanity and all living creatures and human beings and human civilizations. It's an amazing concept. Well, why do you need such an alignment? It's obvious because we're capable, because we are supernatural beings, and we are not merely limited to earthly nature like a lot of creatures. I mean, there is no doubt about that. We're putting satellites into space and we are exploring other galleries. We are super beyond natural, meaning the earthly nature, and therefore we have to have a perspective which is different than all the other creatures. And that perspective, where we can consciously learn how to realign ourselves to nature with a capital N, divine nature, so that we as human nature can be in alignment and in harmony with earthly nature, that invention of the notion of covenant has taken over the world. It still takes over the world. And behind it is another amazing, truly groundbreaking concept: history. We've talked about it a little bit in earlier podcasts, but history is spirituality. It's not what you learn in schools, and Columbus, discovered a new world and crossed the blue in 1492 and all that kind of stuff, even though the Vikings made it to North America before Columbus, and it's really just a lot of European propaganda. It's history. Now, history is spirituality, but it's not just spirituality on the individual life, the individual step by step or story of our lives. History is the belief that covenantal alignment can take place, not just ourselves, not just for ourselves personally, but for all of us. And in fact, it's the purpose of covenantal alignment to include all of us. You might say it's the kind of species awareness. Covenantal alignment is species awareness. We become aware that no matter how differently we look and where we come from, we are in fact unified. And we are in fact one humankind on one particular planet. And there is one destiny that we each share in our own individual ways. And by individual, I just don't mean people individuals, nation individuals, religious individuals, philosophical individuals. All the different diversities of human thought are all included in this. This is truly remarkable. History is the spiritual movement by which all human beings come to the knowledge that we are living in the living experience of God. That is unity and truth and a conscious causal relationship with the laws of existence that we can learn how to align ourselves to, harmonize ourselves with, and have qualities in our society that don't exist in nature alone. Nature doesn't have lack of violence. Well, we can imagine it and we can build that. It's an ideal. Nature has stealing in it. Animals steal all the time to survive. Well, we can imagine a society where people don't have to steal. They can share. We are not restricted to the mere animal nastiness. You know, we tend to really, these days, because we've destroyed nature with technology, we tend to over idealize nature and think it's really just wonderful and perfect and beautiful, but it isn't. You have to remember what it used to be years and years and years ago when things were really nasty and you got hit by lightning. You know, it was not quite as beautiful as everyone imagined it to be. So let's talk about history. Now, we started last time by expanding the spiritual experience for the individual. And the spiritual experience of the individual, as we lived within life on the earth, brought us certain lessons. We had certain observations, such as you put your finger in a candle, you're going to get burned. And if you wanted to write a Bible, you would say, "Thou shalt not put thy hand in heat, in a flame, for verily my glory will come and burn you." I could put it in biblical terms and write scripture, and I would have a perfectly good scripture to guide humanity for thousands of years to avoid putting their hand in a flame. The knowledge comes first. The know, N-O, comes second. First we know, then we learn the boundaries and the limits on where we go and how far we should go. And then we get a know with an N. We know and then we know. That's where all the laws and regulations and all of the no, 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 no's that are in the Bible that drive everyone crazy come from. That's also where the yeses come from, because we see what is harmonious with life. We see what works with life, and we know that if we treat animals kindly, we have a better agrarian society. If we treat our slaves kindly, they don't die. If we eat food that isn't infected, we live. All of these wonderful biblical laws. They are all there because they are based on experience. The problem is we have lost the living experience and we get the rule book, and a lot of the rules need to be updated for the present situation for humankind. So we mistrust it. We mistrust the rule book, as we should, because the rule book is very valuable. But as we said earlier, canonization or a scripture with perhaps the exception of Islam and the Rig Veda and certain unusual scriptures. Scriptures are not revelations. Canonizations are not revelations, and religions make the mistake of passing them off as perfect when they are not. They all have to be evaluated in terms of life. So in covenant, we start with spirituality, okay? And we grow and we begin to flow and we begin to go and trust it. And then we know from the experience, and then we learn yes and no, what we should do or what we shouldn't do. And that's how we create certain moral understandings or customs that are designed to enhance the value of life. Customs that are designed to enhance the value of life, which are moral laws. Okay. Gee whiz, don't murder. That's a good one. It was discovered and codified about 5,000 years ago, and it's still very, very good law. You know, it always has to be interpreted. Is it manslaughter one or manslaughter two? But it's a very good law. Now, the magnificent insight into covenant, which began with the Hebrews. is that the individual spiritual growth of the person is not just theirs. It's not just a matter of going inward and developing inward. These days, everyone's going inward because everything is so completely messed up outward that so much of the spirituality has become mystical and yogic and inner development and self-development. And that's partly because we're in a democratic culture that allows us to develop ourselves unimpeded by governments, whether they are secular or religious. But it's also because there is a spiritual wasteland out there. And we can't accomplish everything because there are so many obstructions by economic systems, by profane governments, by politics, that the only area where we have any freedom is to go inward. So it has become very popular to go inward as part of the spiritual development. But the magnificent insight in covenant, which began truly historical covenant, that kind of alignment that was designed to embrace every single person and every single people in the world into a sense of unity. They bring their own gods and their own paths reveal the unity of existence. Doesn't have to be the imposition of one God over another, but that each begins to see the laws of creation and the laws of God existing through their particular path. Well, that magnificent insight into historical covenant is a game changer. That's when mere spirituality becomes the creation of a tribe. It becomes the creation of a federation. It becomes the creation of a community. It becomes the creation of a nation. It becomes the creation of a league or United Nations. It becomes a single world with a single species composed of different variations and different ways of viewing life, a magnificent texture of all humankind, diversified, differentiated, expressing different kinds of knowledge, but together in a single species consciousness. That sense of unity is beyond anything that religions prior had created. They tended to be more naturalist. They tended to be looking to kind of align with earthly nature, as we're kind of doing now because of the ecological damage that took place. But they weren't looking to transcend it, shape it, and modify it also for human purposes, human dreams. They weren't thinking about Star Trek. They weren't thinking about Star Wars. They weren't thinking about the potential for human society to reach out as a cosmic individual. The, the, the Hebrew concept of history, whereby slowly from a single confederation of tribes, you have a unified world with differentiation, but we are all communicating. We are all sharing. And now, with the help of the internet, we are sharing each other at the speed of light because our souls can connect with the internet really at the speed of light. That invention is you have to wrap your head around it. We take it for granted. We take it completely for granted, and we can't do that because history is something that is here to stay. History is something that's here to stay. If you go on the news, I understand you're going to get sad. I get sad. We're constantly being bombarded by ridiculous things, misuses of war, misuses of power, incredible disasters that are completely exaggerated by ignorant human beings, ignorant politics, because they are using their powers as human beings exclusively for themselves. exclusively for themselves. Oh, they're emphasizing relationship priority number one, where they have to seek good for themselves, but they're forgetting two, three, four, five, and six. So what happens is you are getting a perversion of history, of the nobility of history, of the glory of history, of the luminousness that history is supposed to be, which is a wave of illumination, a wave of enlightenment that is supposed to take over the entire world. Now, that can't happen without a God search. That can't happen unless we know how to transmit the experience called God. And we have to know how to transmit the vehicle for an experience called God, which really is covenant, an alignment of individual within themselves to each other, all others, future generations, all life and creation, with continuous improvement on earth and beyond. It's a cosmic vision, which is covenantal history. It's not backwards. We're not going backwards to recite past dates. Okay, you can go backwards and reflect upon the past and say, I learned this, I learned this, I learned this. In the future, I won't do this. Okay, that's called learning, and that's part of history too. But nonetheless, you are always learning and always going forward. History is personal, but history is not restricted merely to the personal and personalities. They're part of it. But history is collective, and we are all in it together. We Let's go back to the candle. We put our finger in the flame, we get hurt. This is how we have a spiritual experience that leads us to a moral understanding of the right use of our body, in which is called protect your body and don't damage it. Coronavirus, we learned the most important thing in an economic system is healthy workers, not prices of money and real estate and interest rates and stock markets. Healthy workers. Wake up call. Life taught us it. And it's so curious that the word COVID could be interpreted as coming from the Latin, which is covite or covide, which means to live together. Economic crisis, okay? You do not invent, investments from defaulted mortgages. You do not take people's misfortunes that have no life value and turn them into investments. You invest too much in that kind of investment that has no life value, crash, the economic system falls, okay? No surprise, it's not covenantal. The World Trade Towers get hit. They get hit by an extremist religious group. God bless them. Okay? However, do we ever think that right prior to getting hit by an extreme religious group, there was an incredible rise of religious extremism that happened right prior to that? You know, is it as you sow, so you weep? As you sow, so you reap. That was a pun intended because I lost people in that tragedy. Um, do we think about that there is a causal nature to life and there are linkages that we can go back and we can study what happened and see what are the amazing spiritual and moral lessons that we are being taught by history, life lived together. There are other amazing things. We are witnessing these days that women who since the 1970s have been initially in their initial liberation, which was very, very badly needed, had to imitate certain ways of dealing with power that men were doing. Well, now they have diseases that were once the privilege of men, more heart attacks, more cancers, and other things. AIDS came. Well, it's important to get rid of the prudishness, the excessive prudishness that teaches that sexual variation and sexual naturalness is not part of the design of this world. All right, that we'll cover later on. It needs to be caveated. There's some important information there that needs to be looked at. But nonetheless, when you take sexual freedom to the point of wanton promiscuity that serves no purpose of liberation, that serves no purpose other than raw pleasure, well, it always happens. Some kind of venereal disease or natural disaster happens that tames it. It doesn't make a difference whether it's AIDS in the 80s or whether it's syphilis in the 1920s. Nature does not permit us to get too wild. Another way to say that is the laws of God in creation upon the earth. The laws of God in creation upon the earth, or those laws that will permit us to experience good. If you don't like the G word, they're a very dangerous G word. Just use the word good. Those laws have to be respected. These days, we see men who are uncomfortable because they can't dominate women the old way. So what they're doing is becoming more adolescent. They're not committing to women. They are switching from left brain to right brain. They are not finding careers. They are living in a more adolescent way, and it's allowing them to experience certain kinds of creativity that men were never permitted to indulge, which has its good side, but it's also made a weakening of the fabric of culture. There's always good and bad to everything. Animal niche diseases, you don't excessively invade their niches, or you will wind up with swine flu and bird flu and things that are none of your business. Do we have a disease called attention deficit? Or do we experience the result? I think since Sesame Street, though I love it, and I'm not trying to get it off the air at all, where you have flutter cuts being teaching kids to move their attention span from the count, to Big Bird, from Big Bird to Elmo, and they're getting neurologically programmed, and then you add to it the flurry of it and the intensity of the media that comes afterwards, and you wind up with I think neurologically programmed children who are able to handle short sound bites and short directional differences very, very quickly, but they have trouble with the old-fashioned and 1, 2, 3, 4, A, B, C, D, the linearity that was characteristic of consciousness, that when the society was trying to develop that, Air Force pilots have ADHD. They are on a continuous video game. So if you look at what we're experiencing in life through history, it is not chaotic. Don't look at your newspapers and buy into the interpretations of these crazy pundits who are not looking at the meaning. They're not looking at the meaning. They're not looking at what life is actually teaching us by certain events. Or worse, they are looking at it and interpreting it according to an ideology, whether it's political or religious, and they are distorting the meaning to manipulate the news, which is supposed to be fact-based, by their ideologies. The fact is, in covenantal history, it is fairly naked. Once you begin to know, the laws of creation as they actually exist. The laws of creation as they actually exist, as this world is designed. Okay? And then we ask the question, well, this is how it's designed. Squirrels steal nuts. Now, what is stealing for a human society where each individual is considered sacred? Sacred. Now we have a different thing, which is a historical spirituality. And we get a covenantal spirituality that goes from the individual experience to the group experience and embraces the entire world. It is huge. It is wide. It is dynamic. It is dynamic. And it is how, however sloppy we did it, it is how we are here in this place and this moment in time, right? As we look into this world and we say, as we always say all this time, the world is getting closer, the world is getting smaller, and all these things that we always say. Well, it's true. But the concept of the unity of a single world and a singularity of human purpose and a necessary agreement as to what is correct and what is not correct. What do we need to correggere or um, govern together? Correggere, govern together or co-govern. What do we need to get along and direct our societies? I don't like right and wrong, but more what do we need to do this? And I'm losing track because I'm a human being. So let me get back on track. The individual does not just work its spiritual destiny out for him or her or their self. It was the critique, by the way, of Pope Benedict when he was asked about, Zen Buddhism. And he considered that to be autoeroticism. That's how he described it because it was so inwardly focused and it didn't have the historical component. All right, now maybe that's excessive and a little distasteful, but nonetheless, it does clarify the difference between a spiritual path, which is not just for the inner development of the person to know their cosmic nature, but to draw down the cosmic nature into the individual and engage the individual fully in material life with other individuals and in communities and societies and nations and a whole species. We are a spiritual species. Think about that. We're a spiritual species. We call that supernatural. It also included what we said would be metanatural and transnatural. These are levels that can be experienced as you take on the development of God consciousness. But we're a spiritual organism. The laws of nature have to be adapted for human nature, and human nature must somehow harmonize with the earthly nature that gives rise to itself bodily. Covenant, therefore, is dynamic. Covenant is an incredible learning experience. This kind of alignment between all of these dynamic levels of human life is the very purpose of our day-to-day existence. It's not just to go to work and earn some money and put the kids through school and all this other stuff. It is covenant. To learn how to do it with grace, to learn how to do it with harmony, to learn how to do it with wonder, to learn how to do it with a sense of humor, to learn how to endure the suffering and transmute the suffering into tremendous learning and release that learning that's born of pain back into the world to improve it. This is the dynamism of human history, the forward spiritual motion of individuals, group individuals, communities, nations, tribes, everyone, so that we become aware in toto, all of us, that humanity is a spiritual species and that our destiny is not limited to the earth. God breathed into us his spirit, as it says in Genesis, out of dust. And in more metaphysical versions of that, such as if you're a Christian, the book of Hebrews or the first chapter of John, where the dust is really the substance of God. It's the consciousness that is behind thought. We're cosmic beings, and covenant, when it makes its transition from an individual learning to just not put her finger in a flame, to whole groups of people that learn not to incinerate their planet with nuclear bombs because it will burn. Covenant becomes a vehicle, properly speaking, when properly executed, for what religions called, in a way that can sound distasteful to people who have been burned, pun intended by it, it can be salvational. Covenant is a pathway to the salvation of yourself as an individual, and you are not separate from history. You are not separate from me. I am not separate from you. We're all in it together. That's what the historical aspect of covenant is about. That's what it's about. Next time on podcast 26, yeah, 26, we're going to talk about legal systems and some of the horrors that our legal system is doing and what the spiritual correction is. It's a very important part of covenant, okay? And we're going to do that. In the meantime, go to yourgodsearch.com, engage the conversation, and really, truly take on the adventure of God search. Take on the vehicle of covenant. Join with other people who get it and find a spiritual family wherever you find it. If you can find it in your religions, great. If you can't, then you'll have to make your own religion. But whatever it is, uncover God, discover God, and recover the truth, the core essence to any religion that had hurt you in the past, and rediscover it, and maybe even choose to bring it back into the religion of your birth and evolve that to its next stage of development. This is Michael Shevack. Thanks for coming to God Search. It's always great. And by the way, I just want to say, you've been noticing in the past couple of weeks that my environment has been less than beautiful. It is because I am moving and none of the furniture has been sent yet. None of the pictures are on the wall. So I apologize for the nakedness of everything. It's not for lack of concern. But basically, I got a blank slate behind me that's going to evolve over the next couple of weeks. So, right, have a great week and keep the God search going. God bless.